So we're going to be in Genesis 32 today. It's a chapter that's just kind of an exciting chapter in the Bible. But just as we start out, I just want to share a story. I really love having family around. I'm a big family guy, and it's one of those things where we do family dinners and we have our dining room table. I have my seat at the dining room table. It's my seat. And I always sit there. It was interesting just several weeks ago, Kayla and Aaron and their family were over. Aaron was leading worship today. And Aaron got to sit in my seat at the dinner table. So that's, I think, the first time I've let somebody else sit there. And, he was like, oh, wow, this is strange. I'm like, yeah, enjoy that while you can, right? But last Sunday, we had family over. And I walked into the dining room table. And two of my grandsons, one is 4 and one is 5, Theo and Davy, were sitting on my chair. And they were laughing, and they were like, we're sitting in your seat, Papa. And I was like, no, you're not. And they're like, yeah, we are. So they got the booty, right? I just squatted down right next to them and just slid over. And both of them were just like, right on the floor. And they're like, little hobbits yelling at me. And I'm like, this is my chair. But I didn't have my food yet. So, they're sitting there. They start eating their food. I got up out of my chair. I went into the kitchen to get my food and realized, there's a long line of people getting food. So I came back to the dining room. And where are they? Sitting on my chair. And they're like, we took your chair, Papa. So once again, they just fall on the ground. And, they're ranting and raving at me and all this stuff. And so I sat there for a little while talking with them. And when I realized I could go get my food, the line was short, I got up, went in, got my food, came back, and guess what? Well, one of them got wise. Theo realized he was punching way outside his weight class, right? But not Dave. Not Dave, the 5-year-old. He's going to start kindergarten, not Dave. Dave, you've heard me talk about him. He's the one that a few months ago I came to church and he was sitting right here, right before service. And I said, Dave, what are you doing? And he said, I'm going to take your job, right? That's Dave. Well, I come in and Dave's sitting there on my chair and he's like, this is my chair. I'm sitting here. So once again, I was just kind of like, and he just fell on the ground. And his parents were like, Dave, get up to the table. Quit stealing Papa's chair. Eat your food. And so he sits down right across from me, and everyone starts eating and talking, and all of a sudden, Dave looks up at me. He's got one eye squinted, the other like with his eyebrow raised, and with that one eye, he's like glaring a dagger at me, and he goes, it's time to pay, old man. like, what? What's the deal? And I'm like, really? You were like punching completely outside your weight class. Like, he's 5, I'm 49. There's no way he's taking me, right? And I had the realization it might be different when he's 18 and I'm 62, right? But then if he tries it, it's considered elder abuse and I still win. So, it's just one of those things where he's punching outside his weight class. He can't take it. And as we look at Genesis 32 today, that story is going to make a lot of sense, okay, as we go through this. We're reading at a time with Jacob, and what has happened previously is Jacob has been living for 20 years with his father-in-law. He has 2 wives, 2 concubines, 11 sons, 1 daughter, all kinds of camels, sheep, goats, donkeys, servants. He has become incredibly wealthy, and God reminds him of the promise he had made to Jacob 20 years before, that in the land of Bethel, God would bless him and that would be his home. And so God has told Jacob, it's time, leave your father-in-law Laban's house, go back to the land I told you about. Last week, we looked at this, and Jacob had this incredibly tense moment with his father-in-law where they ended on horrible terms. But now Jacob has something else that's about to happen. Because in order to get to the place where God is telling him to get to, he has to pass right by where his brother Esau lives. And if you know the story, Jacob and Esau were twins. Esau was the older of the two twins. But throughout their life, there was this fighting that took place. In fact, Esau, hey, by the way, Aaron, complete side note, Kayla left her coffee over there if you want a second one. Yeah. Anyways, boy, talk about a side note. Gee whiz. You want some gummy bears? I have some gummy bears too. Let's have fun this service. Last service, the power went out, so that was just weird. But anyways, where was I? Jacob and Esau. Jacob is literally in a place with his brother Esau where he tricked him to get both the birthright and the blessing of the family. And it got to a point where his brother was so angry that Esau said, once our dad dies, I am going to kill my brother. I'm going to murder him. So Jacob knows, after 20 years, God has called me to this place, but to get there, I have to go past the land where my brother lives. And that is the context of this story. It says this, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Is that right? Have Hebrew professors over here. We'll talk later. You look at this, and this is just an incredible thing. Can I just say this? Anytime God tells you to do something, and you step out to do it, and he sends his angels there to go with you on a journey, that's a really good thing. All right? That's a really good thing. Right here, this tells us that this story, there is something incredibly supernatural that is taking place. God is in it. God is involved with what's happening. God has told Jacob to go to this place, to Bethel. He's told him he will bless him. And as Jacob gets to this area, he not only has his camp, but the angels of God are there with him. That's incredible when you think about it. How many of them are there? I don't know. More than one. More than one. But remember, at the resurrection of Jesus, it only took one angel to defeat all the Roman guards. One angel is enough. And yet there are multiple angels that are here with Jacob. Verse 3. Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys, flocks, male servants, female servants. I have sent to tell my lord, in order that I may find favor in your sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and herds and camels, into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good, I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the land of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for a multitude. Stop. You look at this and you see Jacob doing something wise. He's like, all right, I don't want my brother to be caught unaware. So I'll send a servant to let him know I'm coming. Let him know that this is everything I have. But the servant returns and simply says, your brother Esau is coming to meet you, and he has 400 men with him. And that message caused fear and distress. Notice there's no implications in the message of what Esau's intent is. It simply is coming and there's 400 men. But 20 years ago, Jacob heard the message that his brother wanted to kill him. And that fear, that broken relationship has been festering all this time. We'll get into that more next week. But basically, Jacob interprets this information in a very negative way. He grows fearful. He's distressed. And we see something in him we have not yet seen from the life of Jacob. Humility. Humility. And he acknowledges the grace of God. That verse 10 is so out of character for what we see. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. That's incredible. God is bringing him to a point in his life where he is being humbled and having to recognize the grace of God. The fact that everything he has around him isn't because of his own hard work, his own wisdom, his own plans, his own scheming. That it truly is grace, God's blessings upon him. And it's an incredible place to see Jacob in this story getting to right here, the place where hopefully all of us can get to. Verse 13, the story goes on. He says, so he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams, 30 milking camels. That has never hit me before. Anyone ever had camel's milk? Anyways, do they have camels' dairies? Anyways, I don't know. 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put a space between drove and drove. And he instructed the first, when Esau, my brother, meets you and asks, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present to my lord Esau. And moreover, he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. So we have Jacob. He's afraid, distressed. He recognizes the grace of God, and with his prayer, his words are words of humility. But his actions are not. His actions are not. On one hand, he's saying, I trust you, Lord. And on the other hand, he is back to scheming. He is trying to appease. He is trying to fix this system. And he comes up with this great scheme with all of these gifts. That's incredible gifts right there. So Jacob, on one hand, with his words, is saying, hey, you've brought me this far, Lord. Everything I have is from you. You've been with me, Lord. I trust your word. But his actions are still the actions of a schemer who is taking things into his own hands. Warren Wiersbe, I really like this in his commentary, said it this way. Instead of committing the whole matter to the Lord, who had protected him from Laban, Jacob adopted a condescending attitude that wasn't befitting the man of God who God had chosen to carry on the Abrahamic covenant. Sending the messengers was a good idea, but calling Esau my Lord and himself your servant and trying to impress Esau with his wealth was only evidence that Jacob wasn't trusting God to care for him. You look at this and it's sad. And yet I think it describes us most of the time. It describes us most of the time. How easy is it for us to come to church on a Sunday and sing songs like, Lord, when I fight, I'll fight on my knees with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. And yet we scheme to fight the battle ourselves. Do we actually fall on our knees? Do we actually lift things up into prayer? Or are we people that take the battle into our own hands? You go back and you looked at all the songs that we sang today, had a common theme. How easy it is in church to sing the words, but to not actually live it out with our lives. Brings us to verse 22, the pivot point of the story. That same night, Jacob arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask me my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. And therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. Wrestling, limping, and blessings. Jacob is a wrestler. Or maybe for some of you, he's into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's a grappler. In fact, he came out of the womb. How? Holding on to his brother's heel. When's the first time we hear about Jacob? It's while he's still in his mother's womb. And remember the story? She's like, what is going on? This whole pregnancy cannot be like this. Because the two sons inside of her were striving or wrestling with one another, right? Just going at it inside. And there's a whole prophecy about the two of them. Jacob, growing up and even as adults, he is constantly striving and wrestling with people. And the people around him are wrestling and striving. It's just this back and forth and this tension all over the place. In the story, Jacob is the younger son, and he wants the attention of his father, but his father's attention is on the oldest. The son doesn't want the attention of the father. So he is wrestling and striving, trying to get that. He cheats his brother out of the birthright and then out of the blessing, to the point where the wrestling and striving takes on murderous intent. The example that he has, even with his parents, are a wrestling and a striving between the two of them. But Jacob gets to a point in his life where, through his own scheming, gets the things he wants, only to have it blow up in his face. He enters a new season of life. He goes to a new land and basically gets a new family. This time he thinks, whoa, look at this woman. She's going to be my wife. I'm going to have the romance. Her father-in-law seems like such a great guy. This will be my place and this will be my family. Right off the bat, there is a wrestling and a striving now between Jacob and his father-in-law. And with the way his father-in-law treats him, it ends up in a wrestling and striving between Jacob's two wives, who happen to be sisters, between their servants, who are his concubines. And even as we go further in the story, we're going to see this wrestling and striving that takes place with all of Jacob's children. This is his life. Constantly wrestling and striving with everybody around him. But ultimately, the one he is truly wrestling with is God himself. Here he is, by himself, sent his family away. He thinks, maybe my scheme will work and my brother won't kill me, won't wipe out my family, take everything. And Jacob sees a man. And what's his reaction? It's on. Really? He thinks he gets the upper hand. He's wrestling with this one. Thinks, aha, I got him. Have him in a submission hold. But does the one he wrestles tap out? He merely taps Jacob's hip. Knocks the whole thing out of socket. Cripples him. You're just like, oh, you think you're in my weight class? Let me show you. Boop. I think that's actually the Hebrew word there. Boop, right? He just does that, and suddenly Jacob realizes, I am clearly outside my weight class. Clearly, the one I am wrestling with is not merely a man. He goes from thinking it's a man to thinking it's an angel, and by the end of the story, he's saying, whoa, wait a second. I was just face to face with God and I lived? This is incredible. This story of this man wrestling with God. And think about when this is written and who to. Moses writing this to the children of Israel as they're in the desert. They've been saved from Egypt. I mean, the plagues, the way they saw God move with the plagues in Egypt, defeating the gods of Egypt. They witnessed the Passover lamb. They saw the parting of the Red Sea. Maybe you have ever wanted to see that, right? That'd be incredible. They went to Mount Sinai, and the glory of God came down upon the mountain, burning the mountain. And if you read the story, it's to the point where the Israelites are like, Moses, tell God to stop. Like, we can't take this anymore. His holiness, his glory, it's too much. They said they would trust him, that they would follow him. But did they? Did they trust him when they needed water? No. Did they trust him when they needed food? No. Did they trust him that the food he provided was good enough? No. When he said, it's time to enter the land that I am giving you, did they trust him? No. No. And that generation had to pass until a new generation of the children of Israel rose up, and they were the ones who not only said, Lord, we believe your word, but we will live it out with our very lives. Brothers and sisters, we wrestle with God. Do we trust him? Do we take him at his word and not only say it and sing it, but do we actually live it? Wrestling and limping. What an incredible gift of God. Isn't his grace incredible? His grace is so incredible that he crippled Jacob. He crippled him. And that is grace. God gave him a limp. And what is that? It's the point where Jacob was humbled. It's the point where he was humbled. It's been said by many pastors and theologians that you will not be used greatly by God until you learn to limp. Until you learn to limp. I was one time sitting with a group of pastors, and we were looking at some different churches that needed new pastors at them. We were looking at these lists of church planters, different pastors who wanted to plant churches. Most of my ministry has been involved in church planting. And with this group, while we were vetting people, one of the things I said, I was like, have you ever realized the main difference between the pastors we work with who are able to plant a church and stick with it and keep going, and the ones who don't? We're like, no, what? They limp. And that wasn't that smart because it was completely out of context and didn't make sense to anybody. So I had to go back and explain this. But this is what we realized. The pastors we had worked with in church planting that were able to really take it and go had something in their life that humbled them. It might have been something physical. Something was wrong with them. They had heart issues. They were crippled in some way. They didn't have all the charisma. They weren't like the CEO type, the 6'2", really good-looking CEO type. They were like short and pudgy. Thank you for not laughing this time. First service, I said that, and everyone was like, hey. I'm like, I'm not talking about me, you guys. It's like something that's not attractive. We had men who had divorces in their life that became pastors. Men who had had affairs in their history, but repented and became pastors. Men who were alcoholics, but were walking in victory and became pastors. God cannot truly use you until you recognize the limp he has put in your life. And it can be all kinds of different things. But I love the way Jacob responds, and it's the right response. When God humbles him, what does Jacob do? He grabs on tighter. He grabs on tighter. He's like, I'm not going to let you go. I'm hanging on to you. I know who you are. Give me a blessing. I want your blessing. I need you. That's not the way most of us react when God gives us a limp. Sometimes people get to that stage in their life, Christians, and when they experience something like that, they get angry at God and they walk away. How many times have I seen that in my life? People saying, I'm sold out for the Lord. I want to serve the Lord. I'm going to do great things for the Lord. And then something happens in their life and they just get angry at God. The question, why do bad things happen to good people? Lord, why would you do this to me? Why would you allow this to happen to me? I was yours. I committed myself to you. I went to church. I read the Bible. I prayed. Remember our deal, Lord? Why would you do this? And they leave. Or I see a lot of people that God puts some type of limp in their life, and they hide it. They hide it. I don't want anyone to know about it. No, I'm great. Everything's good in my life. Everything's good. Don't look under the rug. Don't look behind the couch. Everything's great. Don't you dare open that closet. Everything's great. Happens all the time. Do you know how many times I've watched people in church that are quick to pray for other people, quick to serve other people, quick to be there for other people, and then all of a sudden I find out like, wait, you've had this issue going on for this long? Can I pray for you? Nope, I'm fine. Can we talk about this? Nope, I'm good. And they don't want anybody to know. Now, there's typically two reasons for that. A lot of times it's pride. I don't want anyone to know that I have a weakness. I don't want anyone to know that there's something wrong with me. It might be my health. It might be, it could be anything. It could be a sin that the Lord allowed to happen in my life, and it humbled me and brought me low. But no, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about that. Other times people hide it because maybe they've been in a church or in a setting where they tried to share it and were abused by it for sharing it. People gossip. People talked about them. Can I just say this? That will not happen in our church. One thing that we are very big on as leaders in the church is we do not gossip at Christ the King. When people share something that's going on in their life, whether it is in the past or whether it is in the current, we're not going to be pointing fingers. We're not going to be talking about that person. We're going to pray for them. We're going to encourage them. We're going to just keep heading right towards Christ together. That won't happen at this church or in our small groups or anything like that. That's the job of shepherds, to guard the sheep, even if it's guarding the sheep from other sheep. Jacob's response is not to run away from God when God humbles him, when God shatters that hip. To grab on all the more and say, Lord, I want you. I want you. I want your blessing. I need you. And he changes his name that day. Whenever you see in the Bible that name change take place, and we see it all over the place with different people in the Bible, it always indicates a change in their character and in their view and position of who God is. So Jacob now becomes Israel. And this is the turning point in his life. This is one of those things that's so hard for us, and it's counter to what we believe in our culture. It's counter to what our flesh says because we want to be right. We want to be the person that wins. We're competitive. And even within the church, you know what song I hate? There's a song I absolutely hate it. And if somebody comes up afterwards and says, Tim, you're a Christian, you shouldn't hate things. Oh, yeah, let me show you biblically. There's things that God hates, all right? There are things that God hates. I'm I love a lot of Frank Sinatra songs, right? Right? Love Frank Sinatra songs, right up there with Dean Martin, right? And you're like, you're old. No, it's called romance, all right? You look at it, and he's got a lot of great music, but the one I hate, I did it my way. I did it my way. Isn't that the most conceited song? Arrogant song? Completely unchristian song? And yet, it so explains our culture and explains so many churches, so many Christians. Jacob was brought to a place in his life where God showed him, you say you trust me, but yet you keep scheming and you keep trying to work it all out for yourself. Jacob, will you realize I am so far outside your weight class? And would you just trust me? I got this in hand. There was another person in the Bible, several others, but one specifically who really learned this, and he wrote about it. In fact, he wrote a letter to the churches and ended his second letter to the church in Corinth with these statements. It's going to sound like Paul is arrogant at first, but listen as he goes through as he states these truths. I must go on boasting, though there is nothing to be gained by it. I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Who's he talking about? Himself, right? 13 years ago, he was caught up to the third heaven. Whether in body or out of body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man was caught up into paradise. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, but God knows. And he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. On behalf of this man, I will boast, but on my own behalf, I will not boast, except for my weaknesses. Though, if I should wish to boast, I would not be a fool, for I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain from it so that no one may think more of me than he sees in me or hears from me. So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan, to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, with insults, with hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. It's what Jacob learned. It's what Paul knew. And where did Paul learn this from? It's the theology of the cross. The Word that humbled himself and became flesh, born into a manger, into a family in poverty. Coming from Nazareth. I mean, can anything good come from Nazareth? Living a life where he had no bed, no home. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords coming and being beaten, mocked, hung on a cross. The ultimate humility. And yet it was for those reasons that his Father lifted him up to the right hand. Brothers and sisters, we all wrestle with God, and that's okay. He's big enough to handle it. But what is the limp he has put in your life? What does he put in your life? When you see it, embrace him all the more. Embrace the theology of the cross. For it is in those weaknesses that he is made great.